Hey there, this is Dr. Paulette Sherman, the host of this podcast, The Love Psychologist. Thanks so much for joining me today. This podcast is about how to look at your relationships from the inside out by observing your relationship psychology and how that creates your relationships, whether you are dating and single and looking for the love of your life in a long-term relationship or married. And we've had several series within this podcast already in terms of looking at your relationships through that lens. And now we've started a series, this is the second episode, on the gremlin, or that negative voice that we have in our heads and how that affects our relationships from the inside out. And I'm actually going through 10 different tools that you can use to kind of redirect your thoughts from fear and from the gremlin into love and to your authentic higher self. And they're really easy. So if you just practice them over time, either in your taking notes in your phone or in a journal, you'll soon internalize them and just be able to use them in your daily life. And I really hope that will be helpful to you. I always say this somewhere in the podcast, but I'm really trying to develop an interactive community here. So I just wanted to let you know that if anytime you wanted to share something that was helpful to you or a similar situation that you thought would be helpful to others, you can go on my website, drpaulettesherman.com. The link will be below, and there is a contact form where you can email me and put in the subject line gremlin, since that's what we're talking about here. So if you're not quite sure what the gremlin is, I talk about it in the beginning of the past episode. But basically, it's that negative voice in your head that has nothing good to say, that's always trying to scare you and kind of keep you where you're safe. And it doesn't really challenge you or let you grow, particularly in your relationships. So that's why it's really important to be aware of it, to develop a relationship with it, and to learn to challenge it. And last time we spoke about having an active imagination dialogue with your gremlin so that you can begin to challenge it. And today we're going to talk about a few other tools. So tool number 2 is learning to be present in the moment and really using the distinction of past, present, or future. Something really simple, but we probably don't think about it as we're going through our daily lives and we're busy. So the gremlin, or that negative voice, is really in its heyday when you're in the past or the future. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but the gremlin has much less power over you when you're actually being in the present. So a great way to fight that negative voice is just to remember to ask yourself, is this situation in the past, the present, or the future? And as totally simple as that is, we're going to practice that a little bit today, just so you can kind of get an aha and make sure you understand what I'm saying. Because if it's in the past, whatever you're worried about, you know what? There's nothing you can do about it now. So don't even waste your energy. It's really an energy drain at that moment. If it is in the future, it's still a non-reality. It hasn't happened and maybe won't even happen. So why are you treating it like it's real? Like there's a tiger in the room. So I want you to tell yourself and your gremlin to just snap out of it of something about the future. If it really is in the present moment, then you can look at it. But in my experience as a therapist, less than 10% of the challenging situations that our gremlin's scaring us about are really in the present. So this distinction then, if that is true, could help you out a whole lot. So let's just practice a few examples. If your gremlin is telling you, and that negative voice in your head, that you won't be picked for the softball team at work in June, and you start to worry and feel like that's real and get really down, is that in the past, present, or future? So I just want you to answer while I'm speaking with you. Okay. If your gremlin says the reviewers are going to hate your book, is that in the past, present, or future? If your gremlin says that all men are going to leave you, just like your last boyfriend did, is that in the past, present, or future? If your gremlin says that you might make the wrong decision on your couch purchase and that you can't trust yourself, is that in the past, present, or future? If your gremlin says that if you cut your hair, no men will be attracted to you, past, present, future? If your gremlin says that you will get sick again after a bout of cancer, is that past, present, or future? And lastly, if your gremlin says that your family didn't think that you were smart, so your boss won't either, is that past, present, or future? And you'll notice that last one, it could be both. It can be both the past and the future. So sometimes it'll double whammy you like that. So from now on, I just always want you to notice your gremlin. even before you examine the actual content of what it is saying, and just ask, is this even in the past, present, or future? Because if it is, then past or future, you don't even have to go further. You can just say stop, and I'm only dealing with the now. And if you follow this little prescription, you'll stop your gremlin in his tracks, or hers, and gain amazing power back without necessarily draining any energy. So you can even write this on a little note or note card and put it in your wallet. It's better than money. And I want you to practice that. And then the tool, if you go back to the last episode about the little dialogue where you have an active imagination with your gremlin and you begin to challenge it. So before I end this tool, I just wanted to give you another example. Your last 2 boyfriends broke up with you and one cheated. Sure, things seem to be going really well with Ron now for about a year, but what if the same thing happens with him? And that's what your gremlin is saying over and over again. So then your adult self would say, this is a fear about the future, which is not present now. I am focusing on the now and I am being happy now. Now, this may take some practice because your gremlin is really used to scaring you and winning, and you don't really challenge it. So it may take some practice. It might come up again and again for a while until you really get that down, and then it'll see it has less power over you. Okay, good. So the next tool number 3, is called the angel on your shoulder, because many of you may have heard that what you focus on will expand. So just like the Native American story about the 2 wolves, I don't know if you've heard it, but we always have a choice about whether to focus on fear or on love. If you recall, this story was about a grandfather and the little boy, and he told him that there were 2 wolves, one on each shoulder, and the little boy asked the grandpa, hey, which one wins? And the grandpa said, whichever you feed the most. So that's what it is. Are you feeding fear or are you feeding love on a moment-to-moment basis? So what I wanted to talk about with this tool is how to expand the love and what comes from your highest good, and how to recognize the difference and to feed the love voice. So just like we did an active imagination dialogue with your gremlin before, we can also do one with our higher self and get to know this voice even better instead of the gremlin one. Because often when we're rushing around, the gremlin one, we're tired, we're stressed, we're feeling kind of grouchy. It's much easier to listen to the gremlin voice, and we have many more negative thoughts. And usually you have to be kind of relaxed and in a meditative kind of state to more, or dreaming or something, to more easily access your higher self. And it's easier when you slow down. So I want to advise that if you're going to do this exercise, that you take some really deep breaths, you close your eyes, and you imagine a beautiful light inside your soul that only knows love, growth, and your highest perspective and good. It is a wise voice that views things from an expanded perspective. And it's really much easier to connect to this voice when you're in a state of receptivity and relaxation and you're feeling really loving. So you want to practice deeply breathing in and out for at least 10 minutes first, and start to feel like what it feels like in your body and in your heart and in your mind when you're in this love consciousness. When your gremlin starts to take center stage, often you're off balance, you're panicked, your breath is short, and you're in a fear-based state. I don't know if you've ever read anything by Dr. David Hawkins, who passed away, but I really love his books. And he wrote one book called Power versus Force. And he talks about how emotions have different frequencies or levels of consciousness. And he even had a map of this where he rated the different vibrations. And he talked about, I'm not going to go all into it, but he talked about how shame might be level 20 and pride might be 175. But as you go higher to love and things like this, it's way, way higher than the lower ones like shame or fear. And he actually rated love 500 and joy 540 and peace 600. So as you raise your consciousness, it expands, and as you're more in the state of love than fear, it goes higher. So you can actually see it as like a stair or ladder or a staircase or something like that. And that's a good way to say, where am I? What number am I at? And how do I raise my consciousness so I can be in a more loving state? And another way that people also achieve this is to learn to meditate. And there are many free apps where you can do that as well. But as you start to know that voice more, you'll be able to see when you're off the alignment and when the gremlin is coming in, and know that that's not your real higher self. So Based on our first episode where we did an active imagination with the gremlin, it should be pretty much the same process and pretty easy for you. So what you're going to do is we're going to have G for gremlin and HS for your higher self. And I'm going to give you a couple quick examples. So the gremlin might say, you're feeling lonely and unwanted, and you may as well go eat that whole thing of Ben & Jerry's. You're unattractive anyway. Nice, right? And your higher self, when you start to breathe and think about what your loving higher self might say, you're never alone and you're always loved. You are a child of Source, and God loves you unconditionally and wants you to love yourself the same way. I know things don't feel easy today, but eating that Ben & Jerry's is not going to fix that. What you really want is love and acceptance. Are you willing to try and give that to yourself now? Which one of these two voices sound better? I'll give you another example. Gremlin. In the past, bullies teased you in high school, and maybe now you won't make any friends in college. Nice, right? But when you breathe and you get into your heart center in a state of love, the higher self answers, it's very sad that you were hurt by those bullies in high school, but that had much more to do with them than you. College is a whole new place and a whole new experience where people will be more mature. If you're in your true self, you will attract the same back to you. There is so much about you to love, and you are such a great person and friend. Those new people will be so lucky to have you. Now, I just want to make the bridge, since this show is really about romantic relationships. Which voice do you want to be in if you're dating, which is already fraught with anxiety and newness? And if you're married or in a long-term relationship and you're speaking negatively to yourself all the time, how are you likely to show up for your partner, either in terms of your self-esteem or in terms of how you approach them, in terms of your mindset or your attitude? I think most people would rather be around somebody who has that positive, loving stance and voice all the time, right, than the negative one, even though none of us are perfect. So I think that without me saying much more about that, you can kind of understand the correlation between how you talk to yourself inside and how you show up to your partner or in the world, or even in terms of what you're projecting about yourself. So I want you to notice too that when you heard the voice of your higher self, it really makes you smile instead of cringe. And that's the same way it feels to be around you. You want the people around you to smile instead of cringe, and to want to really spend more time because it's very attractive to be in a state of love. So isn't that who you would like to hang out with 24/7 in your own head, and also with people who are like that? What we don't realize is that we speak to ourselves in self-talk constantly. So we need to think about whether we're being constructive or destructive with our voice. Start to pay attention. Be mindful. Practice this active imagination dialogue process with your higher self once in a while in your journal, and begin to strengthen that connection to that loving, peaceful voice. It's so well worth strengthening that instead of just continuing daily like we all do with our negative thoughts and making them unconscious. So if you begin to do this, this will have a domino effect of helping you use that higher self voice and unconditional love, first with yourself and then with others more. So I'd love to hear how this process goes, and join me in the next episode, and I'm going to share even more tools with you to work with that negative voice. Thanks so much for listening, and I wish you my very best in love. See you in the next podcast.